Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Welcome. We're going to enjoy a beautiful Sabbath evening service. We're starting off with a nigun. The words are la 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 la. And just listen to the music of Windy and Jolene as we sing together. So we turn in our Sidurim to page 128. In the middle of page 128 is a beautiful Sabbath melody, Yedid Nefesh, My Heart's Delight, which you've heard and we've sung together many, many times. We want to say a special welcome and thank you to Alma, Windy, and Jolene for the beautiful music that they're creating for us tonight. Continue with a meditation before we light the Shabbat candles, which you'll do by yourselves at home with your families. I'm reading from page 121. The source of light, creator of the eternal law of goodness, help us to find knowledge by which to live. Lead us to take the words we shall speak into our hearts and our lives. Bless all who enter this sanctuary in need, all who bring the offerings of their hearts. May our worship lead us to acts of kindness, peace, and love. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, etzivanu lehadlik ner, lehadlik ner shel Shabbat. Let's read together. We're on page 127. There are days when we seek things for ourselves and measure failure by what we do not gain. On Shabbat, we seek not to acquire, but to share. There are days when we exploit nature as if it were a horn of plenty that can never be exhausted. On Shabbat, we stand in wonder before the mystery of creation. There are days when we act as if we care nothing for the rights of others. On On Shabbat, we remember that justice is our duty and a better world our goal. So we embrace Shabbat, day of rest, day of wonder, day of peace. Let's turn to the Psalms as we begin our Sabbath prayers. We always welcome Shabbat evening with Psalm 95. L'chuna ranana. The words are on page 130. Translation for Psalm 95. Come, let us sing joyously to Adonai, raise a shout for our rock and deliverer. Let us come into God's presence with praise. Let us raise a shout for God in song, for Adonai is a great God, the great ruler of all divine beings. In God's hand are the depths of the earth. The peaks of the mountains are God's. God's is the sea, God made it, and the land which God's hands fashioned. Come, let us bow down and kneel, bend the knee before Adonai, our Maker. For Adonai is our God, and we are the people God tends, the flock of God's care. Oh, if you would but heed God's charge this day. We're reading together from Psalm 29 in English on page 136. 136. Mizmor LeDavid. A Psalm of David. Ascribe to Adonai, O divine beings. Ascribe to Adonai glory and strength. Ascribe to Adonai the glory of God's name. Bow down to Adonai, majestic in holiness. The voice of Adonai is over the waters. The God of glory thunders. Adonai over the mighty waters. The voice of Adonai is power. The voice of Adonai is majesty. The voice of Adonai breaks cedars. Adonai shatters the cedars of Lebanon. God makes Lebanon skip like a calf, and Syrian like a young wild ox. So we turn to our music as we prepare to sing the beautiful melody from Shabbat, from Lecha Dodi. We're on 138, the traditional Shabbat evening melody from the Kabbalists who lived in northern Israel in the 16th century.
Thank you.
raise our voices in song again. If you'll turn a few pages to 142, we're singing Shalom Aleichem. I think everybody knows the words of Shalom Aleichem by heart. Page 142. Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon, Mimelech, Malachei Hamakim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Olechem Shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Let's turn to the Chatzi Kaddish. We're on 144 and we're chanting together. Yitkada v'yitkada shemei Rabba Yamadi b'rakirutei v'yamlich machutei v'chayechon u'vyomechon u'chayedechon v'ed Yisrael Agala ba'agala u'bizman karim imru amen Yishmira b'mebora Ve'olam me'al maya Yitbarach Yitbarach Yishtabach Yimar b'tomah b'naseh V'tata v'taleh v'talah Shemei b'kudusha v'richu Lela mikol b'chata v'shirata Tushbechata nechemata Tamir al-yama Imru Amen. We turn the page and lift our voices together for the Baruch Hu, the call to worship. We're on 146. Baruch Hu et Adonai Amborach Baruch Adonai Amborach Leolam Vaed. Let's read together the first blessing, which you'll find on page 148, thanking God for the creation of the world and giving us life and all of the goodies that we enjoy every week. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who speaks the evening into being, skillfully opens the gates, thoughtfully alters the time and changes the seasons, and arranges the stars in their heavenly courses according to plan. You are creator of day and night, rolling light away from darkness and darkness from light, transforming day into night, distinguishing one from the other. Adonai Tzebaot is your name. Ever-living God, may you reign continually over us into eternity. Blessed are you, Adonai, who brings on the evening. Baruch atah Adonai, Amariv Aravim. The second blessing, Avat Olam, to give thanks for Torah, for the commandments, for the gift of being able to do good deeds in our daily lives. Page 150. Everlasting love you offered your people Israel by teaching us Torah, mitzvot, laws, and precepts. Therefore, Adonai, our God, when we lie down and when we rise up, we will meditate on your laws and your commandments. We will rejoice in your Torah forever. Day and night we will reflect on them, for they are our life, and doing them lengthens our days. Never remove your love from us. Praise you, Adonai, who loves your people Israel. Baruch atah Adonai, Ohev Amo Yisrael. Together we lift up our voices to sing the Shema. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem Kevod, Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. Let's all be seated, please. So we continue with the words from Deuteronomy. We're on page 154 in our prayer books. First with the Hebrew. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha v'chol levavecha v'chol nafshecha v'chol me'odecha v'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavcha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shivtecha b'beitecha v'lechtecha v'aderech v'shachpecha uv'kumecha v'kshartam le'ot al yadecha v'hayu letotafot bein einecha v'ktaptam al mezuzot beitecha v'visharecha leman tizkaru v'asitem et kol mitzvotai v'yitem kedoshim le'elohechem ani Adonai Elohechem asher hotzeti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim liot lachem le'elohim ani Adonai Elohechem. Let's read together in the English. You shall love Adonai your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Take to heart these instructions with which I charge you this day. Impress them upon your children. Recite them when you stay at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you get up. Bind them as a sign upon your hand, and let them serve as a symbol on your forehead. Inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Thus you shall remember to observe all my commandments and to be holy to your God. I am Adonai your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am Adonai your God. Adonai Elohechem Emet. So a reading before we come to the Mi Chamocha. Let's turn to 159 in the English. Sing the song of men and women, joined in understanding and respect. The song of God's miracles, and earth protected and cherished. A gift for our children in the generations to come. The song of a land once ravished by war, now quiet and content. For soldiers home to leave no more. The song of a world redeemed, the song of peace. So the words for Mi Chamocha you'll find on 158.
Oh, say,
Hashkivenu prayer, this beautiful bracha, which reminds us that God protects us and watches out for us, especially on Shabbat, to shelter us from the enemies, from illness, from war, from plague, from darkness, from sadness and isolation. We're reading together in the middle of page 160. Grant, O God, that we lie down in peace and raise us up, our guardian, to life renewed. Spread over us the shelter of your peace. Guide us with your good counsel. For your name's sake, be our help. Shield and shelter us beneath the shadow of your wings. Defend us against enemies, illness, war, famine, and sorrow. Distance us from wrongdoing. For you, God, watch over us and deliver us. For you, God, are gracious and merciful. Guard our going and our coming to life and peace evermore. Blessed are you, Adonai, guardian of Israel, whose shelter of peace is spread over us, over all your people Israel, and over Jerusalem. Baruch atah Adonai, apores sukat shalom aleinu, v'al kol amo Yisrael, v'al Yerushalayim. So we turn to the beautiful words of Vishamru from the book of Exodus to remind us that this covenant of Shabbat is a covenant for all time, that we shall protect and observe the commandment of Shabbat every single week of our lives. We're going to start this one again. Excuse us. Turn your pages to 164 in the Siddur. We begin the 7 blessings for the Shabbat evening service with words from Psalm 51. And if you're able, please stand up as we sing these beautiful melodies together. Adonai sevatita ufi agite ilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, וקורא הכל, לספר אשר עוד אמהות, ומגולם לבני בניהם, למען שמו ואהבה. מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן חכם וזרוע. אתה גיבור ולעם אדוני, מחיה כל התורה ומושיע, מחכה חיים בחסד, מחיה הכל ברחמים רבים, צומח רופאים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומגייס אמונתו לשני עפר, מלחמות המאוד גבורות, ומדום אליו, מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה לחיות הכל, ברוך אתה לחיי הכל. Let's read the third blessing together. We're on 171 in English. Days pass and years vanish, and we walk sightless among miracles. God, fill our eyes with seeing and our minds with knowing. Let there be moments when your presence, like lightning, illumines the darkness in which we walk. Help us to see wherever we gaze that the bush burns unconsumed, and we, clay touched by God, will reach out for holiness and exclaim in wonder, how filled with awe is this place, and we did not know it. Blessed is the Eternal One, the Holy God. Baruch atah Adonai, Ahel HaKadosh. And you may all be seated or sit back comfortably on your recliner or couch at home. Join us for the blessing of sanctification of the Sabbath. We're reading the English on 173, top of page 173. May these hours of rest and renewal open our hearts to joy and our minds to truth. May all who struggle find rest on this day. May all who suffer find solace. May all who hurt find healing on this day. May all who despair find purpose. May all who hunger find fulfillment on this day. May this day fulfill its promise. Baruch atah Adonai, mekadesh ha-Shabbat. The blessing of return to the land of Zion, that God will ultimately bring all of us back to the land of Israel. We're on 175, top of 175. Ever-present one, may we, your people Israel, be worthy in our deeds and our prayer. Wherever we live, wherever we seek you, in this land, in Zion restored, in all lands, you are our God, whom alone we serve in reverence. Baruch atah Adonai, sholtcha levadcha b'yirah na'avot. The prayer of thanksgiving for the Sabbath day and for all that we have experienced during this past week. Modim anachnu lach. We're reading together in the middle of page 177. When we behold your heaven, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you set in place, what are we humans that you are mindful of us? We mortals that you take note of us. You made us little less than divine, adorned us with glory and majesty. You gave us dominion over your handiwork, laying the world at our feet. How majestic is your name throughout the earth. Baruch atah Adonai, hatov shimcha, u'lecha na'eh lehodot. Our final blessing is a prayer for peace, that we find peace in our hearts, with our families, and strive to create greater peace in our community, in our world. Let's take a few moments for our own personal prayers. So in the midst of springtime and the flowers are budding and blooming, the trees are in almost full bloom at this point, we are smack in the middle of the book of Leviticus, and with a very kind of serious tone and tenor to the opening verses of the Torah portion. It says in the English, "Speak unto the priests," namely the Kohanim, "and these sons of Aaron, and say to them," and what is God telling Moses to say to them? Namely, that the first instruction is, a Kohen cannot be in the midst or cannot be in the presence or in the house of a dead person. Because a Kohen, a priest, always has to be purified. Death, mitameeta yadayim, it makes one's hands dirty. So in other words, a priest could only take care of a dead person if that person happened to be his mother, his father, or a son or a daughter. Otherwise, as you know, even in the modern world, in our American Jewish world, those who consider themselves Kohanim will not go into a cemetery. You have to be sure of your lineage, of course, but we have friends here in Santa Fe who are Kohens, and they will not set foot in a cemetery. So that's the beginning of this whole discussion about purity and purification of the priesthood. Then, later on in the Torah portion, we have one of the classic calendars of the Jewish Bible. Chapter 23 of Leviticus gives us a complete listing of the important holidays that the ancient Israelite communities celebrated. By the way, Purim and Hanukkah are not mentioned, since Purim and Hanukkah were not biblical holidays. But since we're in the middle of this 49-day period before we come to Shavuot, you and I are literally in the midst of 7 weeks from Passover, which began way back in early April, and we'll conclude with the holiday of Shavuot. Remember, on the 50th day, we are in the Omer period. In the ancient world, Jews would bring a sheaf of barley, a container of barley, to the priests as an offering and as a way of actually doing repentance. Because what are we looking forward to? When we come to Shavuot, in a few weeks, we're at the pinnacle of our lives, namely the giving of the 10 Commandments at Sinai. So we need to cleanse ourselves and be ready for the great gift of the 10 Commandments. Now you know everything you need to know about the Torah portion. I want to share a couple of other thoughts with you. Forgive me, I have to take off my jacket this Shabbat evening. So as you know, American culture valorizes and glorifies individuality and autonomy. We're individuals, we're great, we're wonderful, right? The foundation of America, if you remember 10th or 11th grade history, was that we pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I think most teenagers have no idea what it meant, the phrase, the pursuit of happiness. Probably in this day and age, they have a very different notion of pursuit of happiness. But for Jefferson and Madison, the pursuit of happiness meant fulfilling oneself as a dedicated member of society and doing the right thing for one's family and community. Individual freedoms are terribly important to Americans. And thus you see people protesting these days in various states around the country because they think somehow their freedoms are suddenly been restricted and impinged upon, given the fact that we're suffering from such a terrible health crisis. But freedom of expression, freedom of life, was not only important to the founding fathers and mothers, it was also important to our grandparents and our great-grandparents. I mean, think of all of your families, my family. Most of us came from Eastern Europe, somewhere after the early 1880s. And between 1881 and 1920 or so, over 2 million Jewish people entered into the United States, fleeing the oppression of the Tsar and authoritarian countries in Eastern Europe. Why did they come to America? Because we wanted freedom. We wanted to climb up the ladder. We entered into the golden Medina, the golden land, and this place gave us every opportunity. It's interesting that American law emphasizes individual rights, and Jewish law, on the contrary, actually emphasizes communal rights. In other words, Jewish law emphasizes one's duty to another human being. It doesn't hold the greatest ideal to be individual freedom, individual pursuit of whatever we want to follow, whatever we want to grab onto. Jewish law says we have a special duty to care for other human beings. We have a special duty to think about what God wants us to do every day of our lives. And it kind of shows up in one little instance in this Torah story. At the end of this long chapters, there is a story about an anonymous man, doesn't even give us his name, who suddenly goes into a tirade. He starts blaspheming, which means he's cursing and carrying on and cursing the name of the divine, Hashem. And the Torah says after he does this, quote, his mother's name was Shalomit, the daughter of so-and-so from the tribe of Dan. Community, and so the Almighty is screaming and hollering, why would we need to know about his mother's name and which tribe he came from? Who cares? He just did something really bad. You know, he violated one of the 10 commandments to denigrate or speak negatively against the name of God. And the rabbis say that you cannot waste words. Just because you're angry, just because we have a temper tantrum, just because we suddenly lose control of ourselves doesn't give us the right to start shouting and carrying on and denigrating the Almighty. So if the Torah mentions his family and his mother's name and his tribal name, there has to be a real import to that, a genealogical certification. And here's the import of it all, that when one person brings shame upon the Almighty, he or she is really bringing shame upon everyone in his or her family. That's how the rabbis understand it. In other words, when we use words destructively and just start carrying on and cursing and screaming, there's an implication to those words. It's not simply about how we express our ego or our alter ego. It's about what we're saying about our own family, our own culture, our own background. We don't act alone. We act in concert with other human beings. We're part of a community. We're part of a congregation. In one of the great Midrash books that comments on this little story, it says, why are the people Israel compared to a sheep? Just as if you strike a sheep on its head or hit it in its leg or in its hindquarters, all of its limbs will feel it. So too, when a Jew sins, everyone in the community feels that sin. So what I'm trying to say in simple language is when any one of us does something remarkably bad, it actually has a ripple effect on the whole community. And I'm sure you have experienced that or seen that, and we've read about such things over the years in so many unfortunate ways. When Jews denigrate one another, when we speak ill or slander one another, that reverberation of words echoes back onto ourselves and our own community. Because as we just learned last week in Torah, when you go up and down the street speaking ill, Lashon Hara, against another, who hears it? Everyone out there. It's like the pillow that gets ripped apart and all the feathers are tossed out into the atmosphere. How will we ever get those feathers back inside the pillow? So when we do something not so good, when we forget or ignore the suffering of others, it reverberates in our own, not only in our own minds, but I think it really reverberates in our community. That we have to identify ourselves not only as individuals. We can't just glorify all the greatness of ourselves as individuals. We have to remember that we are a community, a light unto the nations, and uphold that ideal. That is a light unto the nations. Everything we do and everything we say reflects again upon us. So I hope every time you walk into your house and you kiss the mezuzah, every time you light Shabbat candles, every time we make a pledge to support our community, every time you lift up the cup of wine and say the blessing over the wine, every one of those words has a resonance, has a power, and it brings back goodness upon us, and that goodness will radiate throughout the entire community. Shabbat Shalom. So we are going to say blessing for all of our friends and family who need healing, who need strength, who need love. We're going to sing the Misha Berach. Before we sing the Misha Berach with Alma and Windy and Jolene, let's remember some of our own congregants who are getting stronger and stronger in these past few weeks, especially Lynn Kelly, who is home now and feeling much, much better. Reggie Klein, Flo Vinnick, Helene Marin, Joan Scheinberg.
My friend Dave, who's having eye surgery.
Dave, please. Any other names that we're thinking of? Doreen Hertig, Bonnie Cantor, Cantor Ephraim's father, who is still getting stronger and stronger. So if you'll please turn in your prayer books to page 371, we will sing in the middle of the page, Misha Berach. One special announcement. We are not going to have a Board of Directors meeting this coming Monday. We are postponing it until Monday the 18th, I believe. So in case you were planning to be on Zoom, join us for the board meeting. Wait another week, you'll get a special notice. Everyone is always welcome to be with us for our board meetings. We go to the closing prayers now to the Aleinu, which is on 586. In the middle of page 586, we sing together. Let me open up the ark. Aleinu l'shaber l'adon hakol, l'tekeva l'tzereshit, shelo asanu k'goyei haratzon, v'lo shamanu k'mishpachot adama, shelo sam melkeinu So remain standing with us, and I'll read this brief meditation before we come to the Kaddish prayer. Page 597. Our thoughts turn to those who have departed this earth, our own loved ones, those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people whose graves are unmarked, those of every race and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. As we remember them, we meditate on the meaning of love and loss of life and death. On this Shabbat, we recall during the period of Shloshim, Rena Freelo, dear friend of Reggie Klein, and Edwin Fields. This, their yahrzeit memorial with love and devotion, we now remember Jim Cornelius, friend of Gail Rappaport and Sonny. Kenneth Feingold, my uncle. Lena Kurland, grandmother of Joan Kessler. Seymour Marin, husband of Helene Singer Marin. Alvin Weingarten, stepfather of Mark Sanders. Carolyn Goldstone Schiff, and Philip Starr. So please turn with us. We come to page 598. 598 are the words for the Kaddish prayer. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabba, v'alma divra chirutei, v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon v'yomechon, v'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael, v'agala b'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yeheshmei Rabba mevarach, v'alam almei almaya. V'parach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitakar v'yitalev v'yitalal shemei d'kudusha b'richu. V'yinkol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, amiram v'yalma v'imru amen. Yehesh Rabba Rabba min Shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav, u'yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav, u'yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Again, a special thanks to Jolene, Windy, Alma, and also our videographer, Lela Dawkins. The words for the Kiddush, for the sanctification of the wine, for the Sabbath day, are on page 123 in the Siddur, page 123. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzah banu, v'shabbat kacho yahava b'ratzon inchilanu, zikaron l'maaseh bereshit, kihu yom tehillah l'mikra'e kodesh, zecher l'tziat Mitzrayim, ki Shalom, Amotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom, everyone.